I'm Douglas Poe, the director of the Lewis Center for Church Leadership at Wesley Theological Seminary and an elder in the Baltimore, Washington Conference. I'm your moderator for this conversation today. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us for this conversation on the crisis of younger clergy in the United Methodist Church. I'm really excited to introduce our panelists to you. Joining us is Andrew Davis, a newly ordained elder in full connection in the California-Nevada Conference of the United Methodist Church. Andrew is a 2016 Wesley M.Div graduate, currently serving Community UMC in Quincy, California. Eun Jin, Jinny Kim is an M.Div student at Wesley preparing for ministry as an elder. She currently serves at Eden Korean United Methodist Church in Baltimore, Maryland. Eun Milosi is a 2019 Wesley graduate commissioned as an elder. He currently serves at Lakin First UMC in Lakin, Kansas. And Haley Hamblin is an MDiv student at Wesley preparing for ministry as a deacon. She currently serves at Capitol Hill UMC in Washington, D.C. Please post any questions you have in the question and answer, which is a part of your Zoom menu. We will respond to as many of these questions as we possibly can. It may help for you to select speaker view so that it forefronts the person who is talking at that time. Before we engage our panelists, I want to remind everyone how the abrupt decline of young clergy has increased over the past few years by sharing a video that's really brief with you to illustrate this sharp decline.
In 2006, the newly established Lewis Center for Church Leadership issued its first report on age trends among United Methodist clergy. It revealed, among other things, that the number of elders under age 35 had declined steadily over a 20-year period to a shockingly low number of 850, representing less than 5% of active elders. This finding set off alarm bells, and the church responded with a range of initiatives to support and encourage younger candidates for ministry. And in the decade that followed, the number of young elders increased steadily, due in large part to a notable increase in the number of young female elders. But sadly, in 2016, these positive trends started to erode, and then in the last 2 years declined more dramatically, to the point that today, the number of young elders has dropped back to almost the same level of 15 years ago when we first named the crisis of younger clergy, erasing a decade of progress.
Having just viewed the video and the decline, let me begin by asking our panelists, can you just throw out some of the causes why you think there's been such an abrupt decline in the past few years?
I think the length of the process is difficult.
Definitely the cost of seminary.
The uncertainty of the future of the United Methodist Church since the 2016 General Conference.
You don't need to become ordained to volunteer at a church.
Thank you for those, and I'm sure there are others that you may think of as we go along, but I want to focus on sort of the elephant in the room, which was named as sort of the uncertainty of the United Methodist Church since the 2016 General Conference. And I would like to begin with Andrew and just sort of have you reflect on, what role do you think that uncertainty is playing in the decline for young clergy going into ministry or answering a call to ministry?
Well, I think that, as Yvonne noted, the uncertainty, I think, is definitely something that, we all are looking at. I mean, having just been ordained myself, I'm constantly looking to see if, are we going to be in the same denomination? Are we going to, especially when it comes to pension and salary too, are we going to be able to retire in time? And so, yeah, it's something that definitely keeps me up at night sometimes, but also with our churches too. We just don't know what's going to happen next year with the rescheduled general conference, and also having to, with our churches, some of our churches have declined significantly because of that. I know where I serve in rural Northern California, I've lost about 8 people as a result of last year's, and a lot of younger people are not wanting to engage either. And, if we want to get younger people into the ministry, we need to have younger people in our churches. So that's one of the things that I've found a challenge with engaging our younger people, is facing the uncertainty.
Thank you, Andrew. And I want to go to Haley next, who is in seminary pursuing becoming a deacon, and just sort of get your reflection on sort of what role you think the decline has played, particularly for people who may be interested in not being an elder, but being a deacon.
Yeah, I think that the uncertainty with the Methodist Church has caused a lot of young people to decide whether this is a process they really need to go through. Jinny mentioned earlier that you can still be actively involved in ministry and not be ordained. And so I think particularly for folks working outside of the local church context, understanding what's going to be happening with the denomination is going to have great impacts on the kinds of ministry that young people can engage in, and how their calls to love and serve might manifest. And so before entering a 7 to 10 year process, I think young people just want to be sure that this is what they really want to commit to, that they want to spend all the time and the money and the effort to do this with the UMC, especially if they're concerned that their theological perspectives might not be represented by whatever decision the church makes on either side, and how that might complicate their role in ministry or how they feel called to serve.
Thank you, Haley. And Jinny, I want to come to you next, who also is a student at Wesley, but also serving at Eden Korean United Methodist Church, and get your perspective on sort of what role the decline is playing from your perspective.
I really agree with what Haley has brought up, especially in that as a international student and as a woman, it is very difficult to decide where I need to go so that I could be supported as a female leader and as a minority in the whole of the United States. So for young people like me, we really need to invest in one, or else it feels like we're failing or we're not doing our part. And so that's what I speak of when I think of from the international perspective.
Thank you. Yvonne, want to get your perspective. You are commissioned in Kansas, of what role that you see this uncertainty playing.
Yes, on my side as an ordained elder, I will say no one wants to be part of something that future is uncertain. It's a lifetime commitment. It takes a lot of work to go through the whole process of ordination, and it's something that we want to commit for our entire life. But since the future is uncertain, so this has raised so many questions in those who are exploring and discerning, even for those who had already started the process. What will happen in the next 2 years? Where will I be? Well, what I've already done as a process will be considered to whatever side I decided to go. So the uncertainty, the future is not really clear, and that has discouraged so many young people to even start or consider the process itself.
And any of you can answer this just as a follow-up. Do you believe that once things get settled, however they get settled for the denomination, that more young people will start coming into the pipeline? Or do you think that we sort of have lost momentum because of the current sort of turmoil within the denomination?
I think it depends on the direction that the church goes. I think this is a really big issue, but I also think there are other complications. So I don't think that the decline in young clergy is simply because of the uncertainty of the church. I think there are some structural problems, just general cultural trends. We've talked about seminary cost and some of the barriers for students that are younger coming out of undergrad. So I think that there are other things to consider for the decline of young clergy, but I think that depending on the decision that the church makes, it will either encourage young people to either join or continue or discourage them.
Andrew, it looks like you were trying to jump in.
Yeah, I think that, just from what I'm seeing, and at least in my area too, is that we have a lot of younger people who are not engaged in the church, and their parents aren't even engaged in the church. And every year we try to make it a goal to reach out to young families. And, if we're not getting even when we reach out, we're not always getting the young families to come in. And so, if we're not getting young families to come in, it makes me wonder, how are we going to convince younger people to go into the ministry?
Jinny, Yvonne, did you want to add anything before we move on to one of the other causes? All right. Let me shift gears a little bit and talk about the appointment process. So a couple of you have mentioned sort of how long the process is to get into ministry. And then, of course, once you finish that process, your first appointment for younger people may be sort of in the outskirts or to a really small sort of congregation. Do you think that plays a role in the decline? And we'll begin this time with Yvonne.
I will say yes, in the sense that I know that it's really also a challenge for the cabinet when it comes to appoint young clergy, trying to find the profile of the church and the profile of the clergy to see where it matches the best. And the challenge also has become in the decline in the church of young people. So then we may have young clergy who are serving community and congregation where the gap in age is really big. So there are no young people, and there are not young people in the congregation and in the community. So it has become a challenge for the young clergy even to use the energy, to use the resources, to use the experience, even the knowledge that they get in seminary to implement it, because it might not be really fitting in the context. So that's also it's a challenge in terms of appointment, which I know that the cabinet also does what they can to find the best match, but it's still really a challenge.
And Jinny, same question to you, but then also asking, I also know that in many cases that when you come to the US from another country, that they try to match you in a congregation that fits from the country you come from. So do you think that that also plays into the challenge here in the United States?
I think definitely those people who come from Korea or other countries who don't speak English as a first language have that difficulty and that barrier because their language is limited. So if they are appointed with a church that just only speaks the English language, there might be some frustrations and limitations that maybe if they had served in a church where it was their first language, they could have done a much more, I guess, better job. That word is very ambiguous. And so that is a challenge because sometimes young people are appointed far off into the countryside because, they are just, oh, you're young and you have not much experience. So just go over there, do your thing. And when you're older, we'll bring you back. So that's my take.
Haley, of course, deacons are in a little bit different situation in terms of that they are not appointed necessarily, but sort of find their own placements. But so can you share that perspective?
Yeah, so I think the appointment process is not something deacons are subject to, as you've mentioned. And so I don't have a lot of comments about myself in that process, but I know it's definitely a concern for a lot of my friends and fellow students and seminarians, and what's going to happen for their residency and their after commissioning, what might happen when they are fully ordained. I think as a deacon candidate right now, the biggest struggle is figuring out ways to incorporate my own call into what the church's vision will allow. So really pushing the boundaries of what is traditionally considered deacon roles or deacon ministry. I feel called to be outside the local church. So there's just a lot more legwork to find my path and to find my, job description, what's going to pay the rent and the bills. And so I think that's another detriment for young people in the church is if you're going as a deacon, you don't have any of those protections financially or otherwise through the church. And so there can be some difficulty in finding our jobs and our placements post seminary once we get into the commissioned process.
And Andrew, would you like to add your perspective?
Yeah, and having been appointed to a fairly rural area now, which actually for me, I love it here. I do love it here. And there's a lot of recreational opportunities and it aligns with my interest, the arts and the outdoors. But I know for a lot of people, there's a little bit of a stigma sometimes with the idea of getting appointed to a more rural area. And one of the nice things is that, it does have its benefits, though. It is definitely a close-knit community, but you also do run into some of the people in your congregations who have been there for a long time and, they're very set in their ways. And sometimes what your congregation expects and what you expect can sometimes be two different things and could sometimes lead to frustration. But I see it as a mixed blessing in being here. But at the same time, like I say, I can definitely see some of the stigmas, though, about being appointed to a small town or out somewhere else or in the middle of nowhere. And it does get lonely sometimes, though. Sometimes you do struggle to find friends your own age. And so like a lot of my friends my own age are 3 hours away in Sacramento, along with my family. And so sometimes that could be a challenge, too, that we can face is when you're more isolated. So to make sure you also align with colleagues in the area too, in the ecumenical church as well.
Thank you for that, Andrew. And it's sort of, I'll ask Vaughn and then others can respond also. Do you believe that for some younger people, particularly those who have family, have partners or close friends, that being that they're isolated from them, or the family situation is their spouse or partner may make more money than they do, also is a detriment to going into called ministry?
I will say yes. When we have, let's say the husband is a clergy and the wife is not, when it comes also for appointment to move around, it's the appointment system, the itinerancy system has become also a challenge for younger people who wish to focus on their career and also to spend as many years as they can in one place. But if one is a clergy who has to abide by the itinerancy, then it becomes a challenge where to move. And not only, I will say not only for the couple that's one is a clergy and one is not, even for the couple clergy, it's still also a challenge in the sense that when one is moved, the other should also be considered and also find a match for the two with their profile, with churches that need them. It's also a big challenge.
And we have to move on, but I want to ask and just have you each respond briefly. So if you could describe your ideal appointment, if you could place yourself anywhere, what would be your ideal appointment? And I will start with our seminarians. Jinny, what would be your ideal appointment if you could place yourself anywhere?
I think it's really important to match where our passion is and what kind of calling we have and who we want to serve. I'm saying it kind of broad because everyone has different passions, but if people like the DS and the other, I don't know the terms, I'm sorry, but if other people are willing to listen to what we have to say and where our heart is, I think that would make an easier transition for us to serve at the place where we also feel called, because although we are young, God still calls us.
Haley?
So again, I won't be under the traditional appointment system, but
Right.
I think my ideal placement or job or whatever you want to call it would be something that allowed me to work both interpersonally with folks, but also towards institutional change. As a deacon, I have a very strong call to justice. And so something that provides me an outlet to do justice and compassion ministry, and also that I feel like is contributing to the change of the systems that have put people in marginalized places.
Andrew, the same thing.
So I'm probably going to be facing my first itinerant move this next year, and so I'm actually hoping to go. I love the coast, I love the mountains where I'm at right now, but I would like to go somewhere that'll stretch me, somewhere that I'm looking to go to an urban to suburban setting that to be stretched after serving rural to semi-rural to suburban churches over as a layperson, and so I'm really hoping to go where I can really engage in social justice ministries, and creating community partnerships is something I also really enjoy, and I've been able to do up here, but I want to try and be able to stretch myself out there and continue to be of service in the community, and somewhere where I can really be the church in the community, not necessarily tied to my office or to a building.
All right, and Yvonne.
My ideal appointment will be to be in a place where I use my gifts and my talent and my experience, and a place where I grow. So a place where we are engaged in a learning process, both myself as a pastor and also the church, the congregation, and the community. A place where we challenge ourselves in various ways. So a place where I'm challenged theologically, spiritually, physically, in any ways that can help me to become better, and in a place where they accept also my input in as we grow together.
All right, thank you. I want to sort of shift gears again, and I want to talk about sort of the complex ecology for how people go through the process into ministry. And of course, we can't cover every level, but we want to cover some of the key sort of components of that process. And I want to begin with the local congregation, because of course, many individuals find their calling in local congregations. And what I would like you to reflect upon is, as you think about this pipeline, if you could sort of think about sort of what has been helpful in the pipeline, what has been challenging, and sort of are there some suggestions for improving it so that the process can be better than it is currently? And we'll start with Jinny talking about the local congregation.
For the local congregation, I believe that the local congregation plays a big role in nurturing people into the ministry. But of course, there are challenges that we face. And so I kind of came up with an acronym because I believe leaders in the local congregation needs to recognize young people's gifts individually as they go into ministry. And I put gifts as my acronym. So G. you have to get to know the young people. You have to get to know them in a level where you are interested in what they want and what they're interested in. And I invest. You have to be able to recognize them, recognize who they are in the congregation, and be a part of their life and invest your time, your money, and your love to these people, because young people are the future of the church. And F, friends. You have to be friends with them in a level where you can support them, so that you can encourage them to eventually talk to a pastor. And I say become friends because we want you to be our supporter, not an influencer. Because when I feel supported, then I'll listen to what you want to say, and I know that we're on the same team. And T, teach them to become leaders, or find teachable spirits, so that when as leaders, you can see your congregation who is good at this and that. And when you're able to see their gifts, then you can ask the Holy Spirit to lead you and talk to them and invest your life and your love into their lives. But of course, the challenge is that churches don't know how to keep the young people in the church anymore. And we need to really be focusing on getting the young people to the church. But the question is, how can we be authentic in our worship to bring community, to bring koinonia to the young people? And also, the other challenge is that there are not a lot of young people in the church, so probably not enough encouragement to get out. But the question is, how can we become a missional church to just get that community together? And so the things I want to suggest is to remember that young people are the church's future, and to really give them love and attention and really invest in their lives. And 3, like I said in the beginning, to become a supporter, not an influencer.
Thank you very much. That was well stated, and I love the acronym. Of course, when people experience a calling at the local congregation, then we send them to seminary. And seminary also plays a role in this. So Haley, can you share with us some thoughts about seminary?
Yeah, so I think that I'll start with some of the great things about seminary. Seminary is a place where we are challenged theologically. It's the place where we really, I think, at least in my experience, I've been able to examine and critique my own faith and my own beliefs, learn about the history and the polity of the United Methodist Church in a way that I wasn't able to just in the local church. And I think that it also prepares us and gives us the skills and abilities to do things like pastoral care, dealing with conflict, learning about issues and contexts outside of what we may have experienced by interacting with folks from different places and different backgrounds. And there's an ecumenical nature, at least at Wesley, that I think really has enriched my own faith journey, and that is all going to impact my ministry. I think some of the challenges are somewhat obvious. Seminary costs a lot of money. And when we think about young people in particular, I started seminary straight out of undergrad. And so coming out of 4 years of already being in school, it's a lot of financial burden. I haven't had a real job to be able to save up to go to grad school like a lot of my friends. And so some of those financial challenges can be difficult. It's also 3 years. And so again, for people coming right out of undergrad or even a couple of years, it's a really big time commitment. I think young people also run a lot of challenges with family, whether they're single or recently married or have young children. All kinds of different family situations can cause distractions and problems for folks trying to do school, especially at a young age. And I think seminary also takes us away from our conferences. I'm in the Western North Carolina conference, and I'm 7 hours away from them at seminary. So I think that the fact that we're uprooting our whole lives and moving around can also be a challenge. So some things that I think have been helpful to overcome those boundaries or those problems have been financial support. I know that a lot of schools and a lot of Methodist foundations and different organizations have offered scholarships and funding to help students with the cost. And I think Wesley does a particularly good job of having different kinds of classes. So evening classes and day classes, online classes and hybrid classes that really allow students to engage with seminary in whatever way they're able based on their current life situation. So I think that flexibility offered by seminary is one thing that can really encourage young people in particular to continue through that process.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And of course, while you're in seminary, but certainly after you graduate, you are connected with the district committee in your conference in the process to nurture you. And Andrew, if you don't mind sharing your reflections on the.
Yeah. So in many conversations in the early part of seminary, a lot of my classmates, when I started 8 years ago, were already connected to the district council or the district committee on ordained ministry. And from what I gathered from many of the conversations is that there's not really one consistency with each district committee on ordained ministry. And that's kind of one of the things that we were talking about even when we restarted our young adult delegation in our conference several years ago. We had one candidate that had been through 3 different conferences and had said basically there were different requirements. So each district committee will oftentimes have different requirements and under the other things as assigned category, in addition to what's mandated in the Book of Discipline. And so for some people, it's a cakewalk. For some people, it's like tripwire going through the district committee. And from my own experience, I found my district's experience a lot more challenging. And there were times that, as one member did say, it is like going through tripwire sometimes, but they also explain that they're kind of the gatekeepers too. So they really want to make sure that you're fully ready. So they want to make sure that you're able to articulate what you believe, why you believe, and then whatever other assignments they have. And sometimes those other assignments can vary. So like for example, in my own experience, I had to write something on social media and healthy boundaries, which was good and beneficial. And in the end, though, I did find that I was able to articulate better. I was definitely able to explain better why I believe what I believe and really bring my passion out. But one of the things I definitely do want to see is to see a more consistency among the district committees on ordained ministry around each conference too. And another example is that there's also one that requires an additional social science course through university or through college. And so, I definitely would like to see a little more consistency across the board, especially for those of us that are in one conference and then go to seminary across the country as well, and also for adapting. So travel costs are very high. We do have to, usually they do want us in person for when you become a certified candidate or for commissioning. And so I do want to definitely see us embrace Zoom. And I think COVID has definitely forced us to do that too, to embrace Zoom. And Zoom works just as well as in person too. So there's definitely some hope in seeing some adaptation there as well. And so, and also there is sometimes might be some differences between elder and deacon candidates. And so I'd like to yield to Haley to speak on the deacon.
I'd love to add a bit of perspective. I think that, Andrew, you talked about how different conferences and different districts, district committees of ordained ministry, DCOMs, will function differently. And so I think in the way that deacon and elder candidates engage in the DCOM process can look different. And sometimes it doesn't look different. And that can be a challenge when deacons and elders feel different calls. And so I think mentorship is a really important element of this process. And again, that looks different in every district. And so, or in every conference. And so if mentors aren't as readily available, or, we only have elder mentors and not deacon mentors, or if the two groups are separated and you don't really get to engage with each other, there's a lack of community. So I think there are different challenges to the different formats. But I think that that's something we have to consider, is that different candidates for the two tracks of ordination will engage with that district process a little differently based on their calls. And for young people, that's important to keep in mind when we're trying to juggle all of the other uncertainties in our own lives at this age.
And Yvonne, I want to come and think about the whole process, so that as people are in this process and they've gone through these different steps, of course, on your way to becoming an elder, you then are under what we call sort of the Board of Ordained Ministry as you do the process. And, you know, can you talk about the process as a whole from your perspective?
From my perspective, the process as it is described in the Book of Discipline, it's very well structured and with different stages to take. It gives a clear picture to those who are exploring and discerning to know already what is ahead of them. But then when we look at the whole process, it's really challenging. It's really a long process. And that itself can even discourage someone when you look at the whole process. And it's not simple, it's very complex, where you need to move from one stage to another, meeting with different groups, different committees. And in the end of it, you see that at time, there is no connection between the different committees that you go through as you move up. I will take an example. Let's say you start from a local church and you are required to go to seminary to take these classes. And after you take those classes, you come back and you are again to take exams on polity, on doctrine. But these are the classes that you were required to take in seminary. You took those classes, you wrote your exams, and you pass. But when you come back again, you are asked to write something about that. I think that can be really a challenge, and there might be a venue to explore on how to do it better so that maybe the process itself can be simple and shortened. And the other thing is the process itself has created so many categories. Let's say in terms of elders, we have declared, we have certified, we have licensing, we have associate and provisional in the end. But when we look closely, we notice that ministry-wise, they are doing the same thing. So what is the point of all of this long process, whereas a licensing can do, a local pastor does the same thing that a full elder does, only that they said this one does it anywhere, this one do it in his or her church. But 99% of an elder spend his ministry in a church. So I think there is a venue of exploring how to do it in a simple way.
Thank you all. I'm curious, just as a follow-up, do you think the process is obviously, I've heard start off as a person in ministry, you're ordained, you're an old person in ministry. And of course, that's said with tongue in cheek, but the process can be very long. Do you think that the length of the process does sort of scare some people off? That process, we need to find a way to shorten the process. And I'll begin here with Andrew.
Yeah, I definitely, so it's basically taken me 9 years from when I first declared myself a candidate officially and got the Christian as Minister book to ordination. And, there are some perks to the process. I mean, it definitely does cause you to grow in ways that you didn't think you would. It does cause you to, during seminary, pour out some of your embedded theology onto the table and then pick up the pieces again. But I definitely think it could be shorter though, and expedited. And I think that there's things that could happen more concurrently. I guess in some ways I didn't do things the traditional way or the conventional way either. So I actually wasn't a certified candidate when I came on board. But I think it could also, like you said, with the district committees too, if there's a way that we could be more intentional with how we work with our candidates and, try to find ways to get candidates certified. And then same thing with local churches too. So and I saw one of the questions too about taking young people seriously, and I fully agree with that. And, if somebody is sensing a call, I think we need to really do our part on the local church level to nurture that call too. But, and I don't have a clear-cut answer necessarily to how we could shorten the process, but I think we can just put it out there to brainstorm too.
Thank you. Jinny, any thoughts on shortening the process?
It's a good idea. And well, I think that because when we're eventually ordained, you are, appointed at the state that you are ordained at, and that limits us to go beyond that place. And as people who are uncertain about what the future is to come, like maybe I'll have kids, maybe I'll get married, and maybe our family wants to go somewhere or live in this place, then the whole process, like if I've started in one place and then suddenly we have to move, what am I going to do with that process? So that's kind of the concerns that I also have personally, because I have to decide where do I want to live eventually so that I can be ordained here and do ministry here. So that's my challenge as well.
Haley, your perspective?
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for the process. I think that I understand why it is the way that it is. I think that it does pose a lot of challenges though. And I don't know exactly how to fix that. So for example, I started candidacy the summer after I graduated undergrad. I'd already committed to seminary. I knew I was going to go to seminary, whether I was going to start the ordination process or not. That was just what I felt called to do. And then once I got into the candidacy process, trying to juggle candidacy in North Carolina and seminary in DC, my decom was really great about working with me, but it was just difficult. And so now that I'm in seminary and I'm discerning more of my call and learning more of what I'm called to do, I was serving in Texas for field education over the summer. What does that mean? And can I go to Texas and do ministry there? And so the process just kind of locks us in a way that doesn't allow for the growth and flourishing that just happens at this age. I'm still learning who I am and what I'm called to do and what I want to do with my life. Jinny mentioned maybe I'll have a family and a spouse and kids, and maybe I want to buy a house somewhere. How can I even know where to buy a house when I have no idea where I'll be in 2 years? So I just think that the process locks us in ways that can be really challenging for young people.
Yvonne, would you like to reflect?
It shows that local pastor, the number of young clergy in terms of local pastor is not decreasing as clergy. And who knows if it's the process that is becoming more scary that is leading young clergy to go into that direction, which is not really a bad thing in terms of ministry, as I said earlier, because I can choose to go on the path of local pastor and still do everything that an elder does. I think there is a venue to explore how to make it simple. We can still go through the same process, but in a more simple way, and avoiding all of this title, which by the end, it's just putting us into categories instead of us being as clergy. We are there doing the same ministry rather than putting us into different categories. That can be really a big challenge too.
I want to end my questions, and then we'll pick up some of the questions from our those out who are participating through this stream by asking you all, who we intentionally chose individuals who are still in the process. Of course, those who are not in the process may have different reflections, but we chose those of you who are still in the process. So the question is, why have you chosen to continue to be in this process, given all of the challenges we've been sharing? Why have you stuck with this calling? And we'll begin with Haley this time.
I think the most basic answer is that I'm called. If there's one thing that I've learned in the past few years, it's that if God is calling me, I can fight all I want, but that's what's going to happen. So I think that's the fundamental for me, is that I'm called to do this work. And I really know that this is my passion and my life work. I think for me, I didn't grow up Methodist. I found Methodism in college and became a member, and then very quickly started the ordination process after that. And so the UMC, I mean, I really got to vet and choose this denomination. And for me, it was the commitment to social justice. It was the Wesleyan quadrilateral. I love that thing. It was the way that we can integrate the intellectual and the heart together in ways that I hadn't experienced in my experience with the church prior. And so in my calling, I think that it's important for me to be part of the institutional church. I know that a lot of people who want to do the kind of work I want to do don't need to be affiliated as a clergy person in the church, and that's fine. I feel like trying to figure out how the capital C church can be the body of Christ in the world necessitates understanding how the capital C church functions as an institution, and not just how we as individual members of this denomination can go out and be witnesses, but how we as a church can be a witness. And so ordination attaches me to that institution in a way that I feel is necessary to really explore how the UMC can be an agent of change in the world to help bring the kingdom of God ever nearer.
Thank you, Haley. Let's go to Yvonne now. Why have you decided to stick with it? You're still on mute.
I believe that this is something I've been called to, and it's for the love of God and the love of my church. I love so much the United Methodist Church. It has done a lot for me. It has transformed my life, and who I am today, it's because of what the United Methodist has done for me. So I do believe that God has called me to serve in this church so that I can also help others in the same way that I was helped. So that's the motivation, is my love for Christ and also my love for this church that has done a lot for me.
And Jinny, what about you? Why have you stuck with it?
I want to make myself available to God for the things that God has in store for my life. And I think as a human being, I need to do my part to live my fullest. And if God wants to work through me, then God will make a way despite all circumstances.
Thank you. And Andrew, what about you?
Well, having been actually receiving the call early in my life, around 11 years old, and then feeling it again in high school, and then being told by a pastor that I should consider seminary, I kept running away from the call, and ultimately God catches up to you and isn't going to let you run away anymore from the call. But I'm a life, except for a 1.5-year stint in the ELCA and then serving in the PCUSA for 4 years, I'm a lifelong United Methodist, and actually 5th generation. And so a lot of the Wesleyan theology resonates with me: social and personal holiness, along with the quadrilateral, the scripture, tradition, reason, and experience, and the head and the heart, that, you know, we can definitely balance our intellectual with our emotional. And for me, it's about walking alongside people, about just meeting people where they're at, and not necessarily trying to say, hey, have you met Jesus Christ, my Savior? But I generally try to be like Jesus in everything I do and let my actions speak louder than my words. And so when I'm acting Christ-like, that's how I'm living out my call, being the hands and feet of Jesus in everything I do, through my actions and even through my words, and ultimately through the relationships that I build.
Thank you all. I'm going to take some of the questions that have come into the Q&A. And one of them, 3 of you will be able to easily more discuss, and that is, can you talk about the struggles of being a single person while in this process of being clergy? So here we'll begin with Jinny, and then we'll go Haley, and then Andrew.
I think I just briefly mentioned that a while ago, but having to decide where to live eventually, because if you are, appointed and eventually become, a provisional elder, then you kind of, like Haley described, you're locked in. And so the challenge is, do I want to start this process now? Because when I was having a conversation with someone, they were like, yeah, I didn't want my kids to grow up as a pastor's kid. But being a pastor's kid, personally, I really liked it, although there were challenges. But that is also a question that maybe can be considered going into the ordination process.
Yeah, I think that from what I've heard about married people who started this process after they were already committed, it was a community decision. It was a partner decision, and there was a kind of support that was in it to pursue the call. I think that as a single person, it's a lot to ask someone to sign on to this, and to say, I'm in a 7-year process. I have 2 more years of seminary. I have 3 years of residency, and then I have no idea where I will be after that. Do you want to date me? So I just think that there's a kind of difficulty and a kind of burden that comes with dating a young aspiring clergy person that makes it really hard to really figure out what to do about the future of having a family, not only being locked in, but also just the logistics. Being in DC, the environment here is hustle and bustle. It's ambition, it's ladder rising. And my call to ministry doesn't look like that. And so trying to find, people that would be suitable is difficult. And I think that that's also can be discouraging for young people. Is I can't do this process and pursue a traditional lifestyle with the job and the family and all of that. And so there's a lot of wrestling that I've had to do, and I know my friends have also done.
And Andrew.
I think Jinny and Haley have both pretty much said everything. I mean, the biggest thing too is like the itinerancy, I think, is the biggest challenge for if you're married or even in a committed relationship. And, it's like you have to pretty much let the cabinet know where, really be open and honest with the cabinet about your situation as well. Now, like in my conferences, we're a huge geographical region. And so we go down to Tehachapi Valley, that's the furthest south. We go up to the Oregon border, the Idaho border, Ely, Nevada to the east, all along the North Coast. And so, it's like you could wind up any of those places. And so it can be a challenge for your partner or spouse, though, too. Whereas being single, then you're not necessarily bound to any of that. And so, so that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Let me follow up with that and ask you, Andrew, do you feel that the congregation reacts differently to individuals who are single and younger versus so what is your reflection on that?
I'm actually in a long-term relationship now, luckily, but I was single when I was first appointed here, and the first reaction was like, ooh, but that also kind of creates a thing about boundaries. One of the things that I will not date a church member, and I do not, and sometimes you get congregants that are well-intentioned, said, I should set you up with so-and-so, or want to play matchmaker. So there, that does come, there are some boundary issues though that you do have to face. So when it comes to being single, and sometimes I've had to say I'm single by choice at the time. And I said, right now the situation's just, I want to get my sea legs wet and want to get into this, and then maybe I'll think about at a later time. And that's partially why I may be moving too.
I'm going to turn the question a little bit and come to you. Is it challenging to have a spouse and the expectations placed upon spouse within a congregation? Don't forget to unmute.
Uh, hmm. Well, as my case, my wife is also a pastor, and she's a pastor in, we are pastors both, but in different churches. So, yes, she's the pastor's wife, but she's a pastor also by herself and also serving elsewhere. I know that this is also something that the congregation had to adjust, because there are some committee where they used to have the pastor's wife, where they used to see the pastor being involved in some of the activities in the church. But now having the pastor's wife, who is also a pastor, so the congregation had also to adjust to that as well. So that's my case.
And let's close with this question. There's a question concerning sort of compensation and cost of living and sort of the challenges related to that. California is one of the most expensive places to live. So Andrew, would you like to?
Yeah, so it varies from place to place. Even up here in Quincy, that in Plumas County, that home prices are going up. Luckily, we have a rented parsonage and a good relationship with the property owners that give us a good deal. But I know, like in the Bay Area, so you go to San Francisco, San Jose, even Sacramento, now the cost of living is skyrocketing. And so I'm not sure exactly with the urban churches, so in Sacramento or San Jose or San Francisco or Bakersfield or Fresno, if the church's own parsonages there, or if they do housing allowance. Although I do have a few friends who have housing allowance and then have to even pay part of out of pocket, especially in some of the more affluent areas. And so, church, but the problem with parsonages is that oftentimes you get deferred maintenance and such too, or you run into maintenance issues as well with it. And so it just kind of, the cost of living is definitely a factor. Like my church, for instance, usually we're kind of in where they usually have had single pastors, or just an older married couple, not a family of 3 or 4, just because of cost of living as well. And we have our conferences minimum, I believe, is 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, and that can get pricey even too. So everywhere it's skyrocketing.
Well, I want to thank our panelists. You all have been superb, and I appreciate the insights that you have provided. And I think it will give all of us, as we continue to think about this crisis, a lot to think about. I want to thank all of you for joining us. If you've done it by registering or through our Facebook stream, and this will be made available at a future time for viewing, for if you want to share it with others who may not have been able to see it. And of course, on Facebook, it can be made available. Thank you for joining us. And I just want to end by reminding of our premier Doctor of Ministry in Church Leadership. It's not too late to sign up for our program. You can go to churchleadership.com, and we have information on our website about the program. And we will also leave up some additional information about the clergy crisis that you can view. Thank you again for joining us.